Welcome, it's the Matt Sager Podcast, Monday, April 1st of 2019, and I hope you're having a wonderful April Fool's Day. And don't trust anything you read in the news. I swear, with all this business of fake news and all these real issues of trust that journalism faces, and sometimes, much as I am loath to admit it, deservedly so, why any news outlet of any sort would engage in these April Fool shenanigans right now when, like, the leader of the free world calls them fake news all the time, I hope that they're exercising caution and that, for instance, the news I've read today, frankly, a part of me both wishes and hopes that this might turn out to be a hoax, but I don't think it is. The Rolling Stones have postponed their tour because Mick Jagger needs heart surgery, and that's never great news. It's often something that goes fine and without a hitch, and that would, in the case of someone like Mick Jagger, like, of course, if there's anything going on with your organs, especially your heart, you stop down a tour. Touring can wait. This is, frankly, as a guy who fell passionately in love with the Rolling Stones, by the time I was old enough to become a fan, the Stones were like pushing 60. Now they're septuagenarians. They have not lived an easy life. And by the way, touring alone would reflect that. But, you know, it's legendary. The partying, the fights, the drugs, how much of that has been going on over the last 10, 15 years is probably next to none, except for the touring part. And touring is no small thing. I don't mean to be like all doctor whoever. And really, don't take medical advice from me. Let me be very clear. I have no credentials. But I do know, for instance, that people say that simply spending a lot of time on airplanes is not really great for your health. And again, I am relaying third-party, barely understood information. But what I've been told is that, like, it's bad for your circulation somehow. Like, the blood pools in your feet or doesn't pool to your feet, doesn't flow freely. So, speaking as a guy who is, you know, sort of into adulthood, the prospect of going on a Rolling Stone-sized tour, even with all the amenities, all the groupies, I guess they're probably not doing groupies so much anymore, but the many amenities, the real royalty that they get treated like, and again, that is very deservedly so. All that travel is not really great for you. I've often said, going back 25, 30 years ago, I said that it was amazing to me that Keith Richards is alive at all, let alone sort of seemingly spry. Like, I noticed that because of the drugs, he began looking old, rather young, but he got old and then just stayed that way. So, like, at age 35, he looked like he was in his 60s, and at age 73 or whatever he's at, he still looks like he's in his 60s. Like, he's sort of frozen in amber in a youthful, spry way that, now that he's made it this far in life, is sort of complimentary, sort of flattering. At the time, it was like, Keith, you're not looking so hot. Now it's like, Keith, you look incredible. My point, however, is that I wish the very best for Mick Jagger. Praying would be the wrong word, being a bit of an agnostic as I am. And as hollow as it might sound, well wishes is all I have to offer, but I have the strongest of well wishes for Mick Jagger and all the hopes for a speedy recovery. And don't just run out of the hospital and onto a bus or a plane and go back on tour. Take the time you need to heal. Heart surgery of any kind, it's not something you screw around with. Now, back to the subject matter you're probably more familiar with from the Matt Sager Podcast. Great gossip today, and I don't think that this is an April Fool's prank, although if it turns out that it is, understand I went into this with all due skepticism, did my research, confirmed as much of this as I could, and this seems like it's probably true, that when it comes to the Avengers, and when you're dealing with the Russo brothers, snitches get stitches. First of all, Marvel and Disney and the Russos are deeply protective of the secrets of their scripts, and with good reason. You know, people are always busy trying to extrapolate stuff from the trailers, so the Russos work overtime, cutting and recutting and sending out new trailers and TV ads all the time, full of as many red herrings as possible. So, like, for instance, I understand that many of the ads we've seen for Endgame, Avengers Endgame, have been full of red herrings. It's basically been a disinformation campaign, trying to hide the fact that, you know, look, they know that people understand this is going to be a seismic change, that the Marvel Universe will look totally different when Endgame ends. Characters are going to die. Characters are going to leave. They are shaking up the landscape in what I think is going to be the biggest way so far that the universe has done. I mean, I'm sure they're going to undo the snapping, but there will be other consequences of the mind and spirit and body, and some people are just going to go. Because it's still the war against Thanos. That is no picnic, even with Captain Marvel brought on board. And yet, there's two holes that really they need to plug for security. The first is toys. Do not look at Avengers Endgame toys, or really toys for any upcoming movie, unless you're prepared to have pretty sizable amounts of the plot, characters' fates and changes spoiled for you completely. I would say in particular, I know this is like saying don't think about pink elephants, but if you want to keep as much of Endgame a surprise as possible, do not look at any toys or articles about toys or ads for toys featuring the Hulk, okay? That's all I'll say. And speaking of the Hulk, Mark Ruffalo, the Hulk, a year before Infinity War was released, appeared on Good Morning America next to a very cranky Don Cheadle. Cheadle apparently has seen him doing this before, but this is the first time it made it to a viral video that went wild, and really to any Avengers fan who would happen upon YouTube, this totally spoiled the surprise. So this is from way back when, pre-Infinity War, Don Cheadle and Mark Ruffalo. Really, it's Ruffalo. And Cheadle's like looking all meditative and like he's trying to just hold in the desire to smack him. He does get actually kind of angry when Ruffalo just spills all his beans and cookies. Check this out.
It doesn't end well for the superheroes.
That's true. In Marvel, it doesn't end that well. Somebody always bites or gets really badly hurt.
Wait till you see this next
Leaves
one.
a mark.
Everybody dies.
Dude.
Not everybody. No. Is that...
No?
Hey, whatever.
Can we rewind that part?
Yeah, you'll cut that.
That's
part
not-
out.
Who is there anybody in Infinity War you get to meet that you're excited to meet?
Then am I in trouble?
A little.
Is Barry going to be mad at me?
Dude, I just move on. I wouldn't try to like
No,
focus
so
on it.
what's that next
Yeah,
question?
move on. I don't know who Barry is, but I'm sure he was pissed. Wow. That was not subtle. I'll attach a link to the description for tonight's podcast to that video. You can check it out for yourself. But Don Cheadle, actually for a moment there, looks like he's going to put on his Hulkbuster armor and he does look as though he wants to smack Ruffalo. And Ruffalo does look like he's going, oh, wow. You know, I thought we were just sitting around having fun. And I think I might have just put my career in jeopardy. And I don't think that's the case. I think it was a one and done incident. I imagine he probably did get a fairly stern talking to, but look, he is a valuable member of the cast. He is a big part of why the Avengers have been as successful as they are, and he's not going to do it again. Apparently, Tom Holland is not as trustworthy, whether he's been more guilty of it than Ruffalo, whether this is something he's done a couple times. Now, there's a few reasons to believe that what's being said about the Russo brothers' attitude toward Holland has some basis in fact. First of all, Tom Holland at the premiere for Infinity War spoiled the title of the upcoming Spider-Man Far From Home. Just sort of spilled the beans. Uninvited. Apropos of nothing. And he even afterwards felt compelled to do a little Instagram video saying, sorry for no announcements, but I love you guys. Well, a little bit of an announcement there, don't you think? But it gets worse. On April 28th of 2018, this was at the ArcLight Theater in LA. A bunch of people came to see Infinity War, and there was a surprise appearance by the Russo brothers, Kevin Feige, king of all things Marvel Cinematic Universe, really the architect of this entire huge cinematic odyssey that's been going on for a decade now, and we look poised for at least another decade more of films to come. But again, a very different set of characters post-Endgame. So also greeting the crowd of moviegoers at the ArcLight, Benedict Cumberbatch, Tom Holland. And bear in mind, this is before the movie begins. This is them coming out, surprising the audience. The audience whoops it up. They're really excited. And so is Tom Holland. And apparently, when he gets excited, he spills stuff he shouldn't be spilling. For instance, he tells this crowd, again, who is about to see Infinity War for the first time, hasn't begun yet. And Holland goes, don't worry, I'm really alive. Ha 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 ha. Wow. I would have sued him and the theater. I mean, I wouldn't have, but I'd have been very pissed if they hadn't just righted the Spider-Man franchise, gotten together with Sony, made peace of sorts so that Sony can keep making Spider-Man movies and Marvel will have a say, not only with that, but in terms of bringing him over to appear in Avengers films. And Tom Holland is possibly the best Spider-Man ever, certainly overwhelmingly better, a real antidote to what had been just this awful, amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2, the ones with Andrew Garfield. Those were horrible. Those made, and you know, I get a lot of shit for saying this, but I maintain that this is true. They make Spider-Man 3 look like a fun ride at the beach. Make it look like a cinematic masterpiece. Those movies were terrible. But if I hadn't invested that much in Tom Holland and I were the Russo brothers or Kevin Feige, any bigwig at Marvel, and if I hadn't made this commitment, I would have a discussion with this guy. And apparently, in lieu of doing that, they're just keeping stuff secret from him. Holland has said, you know, at conventions when asked, that he doesn't get his scripts, that he only gets his lines, and that he only gets the most vague kind of instructions like, all right, you're going to be at a place fighting a guy. And he's like, which guy? And they're like, you'll find out when we roll. Which, for an actor, is kind of messed up, to be honest with you. That is not cool for your actors. To have no ability to prepare for a scene. You're asking for a, pun not intended, superhuman level of ability to pick up. You know, I haven't been in a movie anywhere near this large. I was into Hip Hop Witch, which did feature Eminem. So, you know, it's big by proxy after the fact. It was before he was a big star. But for any kind of role, it is really helpful and advised that you read the script, that you know what your character's been doing so far, because you often shoot out a sequence. You know what's going on with your cast members, the people you'll be fighting with or for. not to go back to this cliche, but for lack of a better word, your motivation. Why are you there? What brought you to the fight? Why are you fighting? Do you look reluctant because you have to fight one of your heroes? That's a very common thing with Marvel. Or do you look like you got something to prove? Because before you met Tony Stark, you were wearing underoos and fighting crime and looking ridiculous. These things actually really matter. They make up the mood of the movie, and they contribute to or detract from Tom Holland's ability to do a good Spider-Man. But he seems to take it all in stride, and I'm glad he does, because it doesn't look as though he's been exaggerating when he tells those stories. The Russos were at a premiere for Avengers Endgame in India. This looks like it was yesterday, last night. And the Russos this time are addressing the fans without any of the cast alongside them, which is almost certainly for the best, because between Mark Ruffalo and Tom Holland, that's a lot of gossip going around. It's like an episode of Wendy Williams. A lot of tea being spilled. And in fact, Joe Russo said this about Tom Holland. Quote, Tom Holland does not get the script. Tom Holland gets his lines, and that's all he gets. He doesn't even know who he's acting opposite. We use very vague terms to describe to him what is happening in the scene. Tom Holland has a hard time keeping his mouth shut. Wow, that is some Suge Knight level keep your mouth shut swagger from the Russos, who, again, I would be pretty pissed too. I just want to maintain a balance of secrecy and preserving your movie, but find a way to not call out an actor's shenanigans and embarrass him. And certainly this business of keeping the script from him, again, if he is that unable to keep his mouth shut, I would consider firing him from the franchise, because he's going to have a million more opportunities to spill stuff and spoil things. But if it's something he did once or twice and you're just being a dick to him, that's not cool. So oddly, my Tom Holland defense is if he's that bad, you should fire him. But you should not have him showing up to scenes for movies in which he plays a really big role without a script. That's crazy. That is like something out of the Twilight Zone. And speaking of, first of all, I hope you've caught my new show, Robot Mutant. We've got 2 episodes up. If you go to robotmutant.com and robotmutant.net, it is a long-form weekly show hosted by me and my good friend Bill Cates. We were friends in radio. Now we're friends as actors. And gosh, we've been friends longer than there's been a Marvel Cinematic Universe, by 10 years. So do check those out. And last night we talked a lot about our anticipation for The Twilight Zone, hosted by Jordan Peele and has premiered today on CBS All Access. First of all, let me tell you, it's great. I don't know where these negative reviews are coming from, other than a lot of outlets that I respect a lot. And I think the Twilight Zone name is as much of a curse as it is a blessing, because it conjures up images of not only this iconic show that has not existed in its original black and white Rod Serling hosted form for many decades, since long before you or I were born. But not only that, the Twilight Zone is one of those shows that people seem to have this weird kind of cognitive dissonance. I count myself, by the way, among people suffering from this, where when you think of it, you don't think of the many filler episodes or the many episodes that landed okay, were a lot of fun, but that's it. You think about the many classic episodes. I think that might be a bigger problem for Twilight Zone than for other series, because unlike most episodic television, it's an anthology format. So every episode is a completely different cast, totally different story, ostensibly all taking place within whatever the Twilight Zone actually is. But that's it. There's no universe building, no continuity stuff and character arcs, or any such arcs occur within a 22-minute episode and then it's one and done and you go on to the next. So, for instance, it's very easy for me if you say Buffy season 4, I go, oh, I wince. But if you were to say Twilight Zone season 4, I'd go, yeah, it was amazing. Because there were no moments where you got to see William Shatner act well and act poorly, but there wasn't a moment in the middle of, say, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet that made you cringe. And that's what you'd have to have in order to have a really full perspective on the Twilight Zone. What I'm saying is it had probably 85% classic episodes, 10% fine, 5% probably mediocre. That is a very good ratio for a show. It's not in any way dismissing what is really one of my all-time favorite, not only TV shows, but just about any kind of entertainment. The Twilight Zone is really kind of precious to me. And so for Jordan Peele to take up that mantle was actually very exciting for me. I'm a huge Key and Peele fan. I love his comedy. I loved him on Mad TV. But when I saw Get Out, and more recently, Us, I realized this is the makings of a giant, a film industry giant. He's going to be one of the legends of all time. And specifically when it comes to horror, he is scary as hell. His imagination taps into some weird combination of our most primitive fears and those fears and anxieties that are really stoked by our modern world, which, by necessity, he doesn't preach, just like Rod Serling didn't. But it would be foolish to do a show and not have any of the anxieties of this modern world in which we've got social media and crazy partisan politics and sort of collapsing of civility. It would be weird to not address that at all, even though even many news shows somehow pretend the world is not spinning rapidly out of control. The Twilight Zone is great because, even for Serling, he had been fired from Playhouse 90, I think it was, because he was an outspoken progressive, and the sponsors didn't like it and the network didn't like it. And when it came time for him to do the Twilight Zone, he understood that the only way to talk about the real world is to couch it in metaphor. The more supernatural, the better. And in fact, watching those episodes like The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, tapping into that real emotion that people were feeling in the McCarthyist world made it much scarier, even decades later when McCarthyism had, I was going to say gone, but it had temporarily subsided, let's say. So there's really no better time and no better host than Jordan Peele relaunching The Twilight Zone on CBS All Access. And I watched the first 2 episodes. First one is called The Comedian. Second one is Nightmare at 30,000 Feet. And they're both spectacular. The Comedian is available for you to watch free on YouTube, and I'll provide that link in the description for tonight's podcast. It is an excellent episode, as is Nightmare at 30,000 Feet, which, as you might surmise, is a tribute of sorts, at least in the name and at least in the setting, to the classic Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, the gremlin on the wing, and I think they're both spectacular. Again, if you check out the reviews, many of them are spotty, some of them are just downright negative, like, what is Jordan Peele thinking? And I don't really understand them. I loved the original Twilight Zone. I was one of the many people who kind of was quick to dismiss the later incarnations, the movie, the series in the 80s and early 90s, and then again, the series in the late 90s to early 2000s. Although, if you go back and watch those, short-lived though they were, especially the latter of the two, there was a lot of great TV there, certainly worthy of the name Twilight Zone. But again, and I think this is where the criticism is coming from, it is such a sacred piece of art to so many people, and it means a different thing to almost every viewer. I can understand, I guess, but really, I give this thing 5 stars out of 5. I recommend it very highly. Also, if for any reason you haven't been watching Barry, it is time to start. Barry airs Sundays on HBO. Last night, March 31st, was the premiere of season 2, and holy shit, wow! It actually is getting much better with time, which is not something you often see. Season 2 is where you often encounter your sophomore slumps. Based on last night's season premiere, don't expect any of that from this amazing comedy, drama, murder, comedy. I don't know, like so many of the great shows, especially HBO, is really masterful at this. It defies genre. It looks like a comedy because it stars Bill Hader, who is very animated and really inhabits his characters. But that is where this also gets very dark because Barry, the titular character, Barry, is torn between 2 worlds, one a world of art and giving of yourself to the world, and the other is past. Literally the past he's lived up until the moment he takes his first acting class is something he's got to keep secret and wants to be rid of and unburdened from in the most desperate way. Barry really, to my understanding and the way I envision it in any case, is an exploration of the anxiety that Bill Hader felt when he was starting out. There is so much of that visceral, like, imposter syndrome and desperate need to be loved and to be able to express yourself and the terror that awaits you if you somehow fail. I think that this is all an exaggerated version of that with a bit more colorful, look, let's not sugarcoat it, a lot more murder than your average comedy. And it's also very, very dark when it goes dark, which makes the lighthearted stuff that much more, it's like the humor and the horror really contribute to one another. But if you haven't watched season 1, or if you, even worse, watched some of it but didn't complete it, then do not go back and watch last night's season premiere. Get yourself caught up, and if you haven't yet, just begin watching because it's a wonderful show. Happy to provide you with some entertainment suggestions. But if you listen to this show when I did my top 10s and top 5s of the best of 2018 and the things I'm looking most forward to in 2019, you know that I like Barry an awful lot, and I really do recommend it very highly. One of many things we can use to entertain ourselves as we wait out the release of Avengers Endgame, hoping to not have it spoiled for us by Mark Ruffalo, Tom Holland, or, the cast is huge. Any number of people there could accidentally spill the beans. So be careful as you consume news pieces about Avengers Endgame, because between the cast, that massive, massive cast, and the illustrations that accompany the toys themselves, etc., can be very easy to have Endgame, at least in part, if not spoiled, give you some very educated guesses as to what's going to happen to who. And that's the last thing you want for a movie as consequential as Endgame. So welcome to the week, and get in touch with the Matt Sager podcast. I would love to hear from you. So send me an email to matt@mattsager.com or call me at 646-535-4788. You can also get me on social media, where on Twitter, I'm @MattSager. On Instagram, I'm Real Matt Sager, and on Facebook, wow, I'm all over the place. First off, my personal page, The Matt Sager, my voiceover page, Matt Sager VO, and of course, this podcast page. Please do like it. It's facebook.com/Matt Sager Podcast. Also in the links to tonight's podcast, you can check out my Patreon, just patreon.com/Matt Sager. And as for everything else, my voiceover reels and contact info, more social media handles and links, articles I've written and blog posts, and even back episodes of the Matt Sager podcast. You can get all that at mattsagervoiceover.com.